Hello, I'm State Representative Ryan Aument in the 41st Legislative District in Lancaster County. Welcome to my new series, Fact versus Fiction, where we will explore different state-related subjects and talk to knowledgeable guests to help us discern the truth. We're joined today by State Representative Warren Kampf, who represents Pennsylvania citizens in Montgomery and Chester counties. Representative Kampf is here to talk about a topic that has recently received a lot of attention throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you for joining me here today. Can you talk to us a little bit about, for those who may not be familiar with the issue of pension reform in Pennsylvania and the pension crisis, how bad is it?
So we are $47 billion in debt in our two pension funds. We have a state sort of school district pension fund for all the school districts, and then we have a state employee pension fund. And for a bunch of reasons, those two funds are heavily underfunded. The problem for all of us is that means in a time like this, we've got to put a great deal of money, taxpayer money, into those funds to keep them going.
I've heard from a number of constituents who've been engaged in this issue that had the state and local school districts, and I'm talking now specifically about the PSERS fund, the Public School Employee Retirement System, that had the state and public school systems not underfunded the system over the last decade, had made their contribution amounts, that we would not be in the situation that we are today. Can you talk a little bit about how we got to where we are with this massive $40 billion plus unfunded liability?
So, depending on who you talk to, you get different reasons. I would say that there are three key reasons why we're in this situation. The first is, back in 2001, benefits were enhanced, increased for all state and school district employees. And they were made retroactive, these enhancements. So what that means is, if you were about to retire back in 2001, you had assumed a sort of a particular pension that you would be receiving. That was increased on one day when the law was enacted by about 25% for the rest of your life. And then anybody else who was in the system, let's say they were just a year in, or they hadn't even joined yet, they were going to get that enhanced benefit. So that's number one. Number two is underfunding, chronic underfunding. Over the last, say, 6 or 7 years, up until a couple of years ago when we started putting in much more money into the funds according to what the actuaries were asking for. But because of chronic underfunding in the past, that's sort of number two. If you don't put the money in at the right time, your debt grows and grows and grows because it's not earning money in the stock market. And then the third is an assumed rate of return. You know, in your kind of private life, you assume that the stock market or your bank account is going to earn a particular amount of interest. Our pension funds, and many public pension funds around the country do this, assume what most people think is an unrealistic rate of return, 7.5% per year. We haven't been making those benchmarks at all. And when you don't make those benchmarks, that means that the underfunding gets even worse.
You've introduced two proposals, I understand. Is it House Bill 1351 and 1352? Do I have that right, or is it 1352 and 1353?
That's
okay,
right,
good.
Yeah, right.
It's hard sometimes to keep track of these as they go by. Can you talk to us a little bit about the specifics of your proposal and what you've attempted to address in the legislation that you've introduced?
All right, well, I sort of started from the premise that most people who are out in the private sector in their jobs, they're familiar with a defined contribution plan. That's what basically retirement benefits are today for most private sector employees. A person puts away a percentage of their income every year, and the employer matches that with some amount each year. But the employee has control over that money. It's totally portable. So if they leave the job and go somewhere else, it goes with them, and their tax benefits. So I feel, and I think many people in the legislature feel, that we should have a benefit like that for our public employees as well. So these two bills, one for the state employees and one for the school district employees, creates a defined contribution plan for all new people. Any future hire that comes into the system would be in a defined contribution plan. And it's a good benefit, and there are lots of defined contribution plans in the private sector that are excellent benefits for employees. For current employees, there is an option at their choosing to freeze their defined benefit in place, their pension in place, and switch over if they choose.
One of the points that I often make as I talk to constituents and certainly state employees, whether they be public school employees or state employees, is that we recognize those that are introducing these various proposals and those of us in the General Assembly that are trying to reform the system. We recognize that this problem was not caused by our state employees. They are not to blame. You articulated very well some of the reasons that led to the crisis. This was a policy decision problem. I've often said that it was legislative malpractice at its finest. Going into some of the specific concerns that have been expressed about your proposal, and I think many of them come from nervous employees and nervous retirees. Can you talk about any proposed changes to existing retirees? Does your bill impact those that are already currently retired?
Right, so the simple answer is no. The bill, the legislation doesn't in any way affect current retirees. We have an obligation to those retirees. We are meeting that obligation, and we will continue to do that.
Along with the discussions that we've had about pensions in Harrisburg, we've heard a lot about the cost of implementing these proposals. Specifically, there's been actuarial studies done by the systems, by CSRS and PSERS, that have pointed to significant cost to transition from the defined benefit system to a defined contribution system. Could you address that specific concern?
Right, so that is out there, that there would be somehow a cost, a greater cost to the taxpayer if we froze the defined benefit for existing employees and made all future employees go into a defined contribution plan. So first of all, just common sense. If you're going to freeze an existing set of obligations and then for new people have another plan created, that doesn't increase the cost of the obligations you've incurred for the current people, number one. Number two, almost every private sector company in the last 25 years has gone to a defined contribution plan from a defined benefit plan. It seems to me if there was some gigantic increased cost, as critics sometimes say, to doing this, that the private sector, which is always watching its profit margins and revenue, would not have done this or would be switching back to defined benefit plans. But there is an actuary, used to be the pension watchdog. We have a pension watchdog in Pennsylvania. It's called PERC, Public Employees Retirement Commission. Their actuary, Milliman, which is now the actuary retained by the administration to promote this kind of proposal, a defined contribution plan, has looked at this and concluded there isn't a cost to it. In fact, long term, there is a savings. And the bottom line here is with a defined contribution plan, the taxpayer puts in an amount each year. But that's it. They don't get a bill like they do in a defined benefit plan when legislative malpractice occurs, when the legislature doesn't put enough money in, because it's our decision every year how much we put in. They don't get a bill 20 years down the road saying, oh, not enough money was put in, you have to put in much more right now or there'll be a problem.
One of the other concerns that I've heard expressed is that this proposal, your proposal, while dealing with employees and with future employees and perhaps fixing the problem at some point in the future, does not address or fix the $40 billion unfunded liability. Could you address that?
Well, I mean, I think that going to a defined contribution plan for new people essentially caps our liability. So in other words, forever and ever, when we add new people, we're essentially saying this system is okay, and our taxpayer for this new person who comes on board Whatever happens, we're okay with that. So I do think that it fixes the liability in the sense that it caps it. It stops it from growing, other than its own, sort of internal growth or shrinkage. All right, that's number one. Number two, with an option for existing employees, I believe that a number of employees over time will switch. They'll do it for reasons of, let's say they're in the system for only a few years. They want to have a benefit that's portable. They like the control over their own assets and benefiting from the highs of the stock market in their own investments. That will happen, and that will affect the unfunded liability in some measure. But I totally agree, the $47 billion and growing unfunded liability that we've got is something that we have to address. School districts across the state budgets each year are being affected by that, as you and I well know, and that's not going away.
I think that's a great point. As we recognize this is a critical first step, but there will be additional efforts that will need to be explored and ultimately taken to deal with that unfunded liability. But until we take a step as you've proposed, we cannot cap that amount and prevent it from continuing to grow. I think central to some misunderstanding here with how the Pennsylvania pension system works is the difference between our retirement system as designed in Pennsylvania versus the Social Security system. You and I today are paying into Social Security, and retirees are withdrawing dollars that we're putting into the system. That's how the Social Security system was designed. Can you address that? Our pension system in Pennsylvania is not designed that way. The dollars that we're putting in, that state employees are putting in, that our public school employees are putting in to the system, it's designed that those dollars, along with taxpayer dollars that are going into the system and market growth, that will result in their annuity. Can you talk a little bit about that difference? Because I really think that's key to understanding, or the misunderstanding really, of the cost of running two separate systems.
Right, and you do hear that out there, that the money for the future hires would be necessary. That's what they say to keep things going. But that's not correct. The dollars that an employee at PennDOT or at the local school district is putting in this year for their benefit, and they have been paying all along, so we have to say that. They're required to pay each year. Those dollars, though, from year to year are going towards their benefit, not towards the paying down of that $47 billion underfunding. That's a totally different matter, and so we don't need the future hires in the system, like the example of Social Security, just to keep the thing going.
We don't have a lot of time left today, but before we wrap up, I just want to ask you one final question, because I've heard some concern over will your proposal impact elected officials? Will your proposal impact those of us serving in the state legislature, those in the executive branch of government, and those in the judicial branch?
Absolutely. For all future legislators, it will be mandatory, just like for all future employees in the school district and the state system. And for the existing employees, whether they be legislator or PennDOT employee, there is an option, and that will be up to each legislator whether they switch or not.
Thank you very much, Representative Camp, for your time today. It looks like that is all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank my guest, Representative Warren Camp, for joining me in an attempt to present the facts and dispel many of the myths surrounding the pension crisis in Pennsylvania. Should you have any further questions or concerns about pension reform or any other state-related issue, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you for joining me for Fact versus Fiction.